Good morning and welcome to my occasional series about recorders. It's been a long time and I'm sure you'll be looking forward to this one, as have I if I'd known I was going to do it until I thought last night that it might be a good idea. Why? Well, because I have here the most stupid assembly of bass-sized recorders. I know where they all came from. I'm not sure why I got them. I'm not sure where they're going to go to. But I do know that next weekend, some of them might be going down to the London International Festival of Early Music in Blackheath, and I may never see them again, which means that I had to video them now to share them with you. So bass recorders, where did they come from? Now, you might remember in the medieval time, we had maybe trebles, they were the biggest size, we had angels playing them, we had a few little fragments found down the toilet, and there was nothing very large or very exciting. But of course, in the Italian Renaissance, everything had to be reinvented to be large and exciting. I don't know why I put that in, but it's quite nice really, isn't it? There might be another one going off in a minute. Renaissance is very good at reinventing clocks as well. Oh, there goes the other one. Never mind. This is my genuine Black Forest cuckoo clock. Might be 19th century, might be 18th century, I don't know, but I'm very pleased it's still going. And I leave it going because it's part of the ambience. Now, bass recorders. In the Renaissance, everything was made bigger, faster, larger, more deadly, more beautiful, sexier, etc., etc., and recorders were no exception, because they wanted choirs of recorders to compete with choirs of cornetos and violins and viols and this sort of thing in the multi-choir music of the time. So, recorder, a consort of recorders, organ pipes with finger holes, were developed. No one's quite sure who the people were who developed them. We have names, we have signs, but we don't have no history. All we have are the instruments themselves, and they absolutely fill the museums of Central Europe, like Vienna and Nuremberg. And so when we were all young recorder makers, we looked at this and we all wanted to go and make a consort. Now, at the time, people were travelling all around Europe, measuring instruments, scratching the insides, scratching the outsides, really annoying museum directors. And I think I was probably one of the last people that measured the recorders in Vienna before Adrian Brown did the definitive set. But Vienna has the big Renaissance recorder, so I'm going to start with that. I cannot believe that I actually made this. I'm not sure when, must be 1983, 1984, something like that. I'd gone out to Vienna, I managed to measure things, and the reason why these recorders work is because some bright spark worked out that if you had two groups of finger holes, you can see the two groups of finger holes here, and you had a large one, a middle one and a small one, then you put your left hand and your right hand a long way apart and the scaling still worked. Nowadays, of course, we have forests of keys, and perhaps they could have asked Leonardo da Vinci to invent a forest of keys, but he was too busy painting Last Suppers and inventing weapons of mass destruction. So, this recorder exists, it's there, anyone can go and see it. I don't know if it's still on display. And it sort of works. Do I play notes on it? Well, I can play notes on it. It only plays in the middle at the moment, excuse me, it should be on a prop really. It actually sounds very nice. The bottom doesn't work because the key doesn't work, and I haven't actually touched it for years until I dusted it off a couple of hours ago. I like it. Why have I still got it? Because it's an A460. All the instruments are about A460. And of course, once people developed the dread of transposing keyboards, suddenly Renaissance pitch was magically transmuted to A466, an exact semitone above A440, and all instruments at A460 are completely unwanted. And I have tried to interest people occasionally. I say it's at A460 and they say, what on earth for? We can't want that because we can't mix it with anyone else's recorders, which is absolutely fair enough. One of these days, it'll be in a garage sale. Look out for it. And to go with the great bass in F, I also made the great bass in C, which also you have big, middle, small, and a key at the bottom. This one works rather better. I'm going to play the same tune on everything because I'm too stupid to think up anything else, and it's not even a Renaissance tune. This recorder, it works beautifully. Here's the bass that goes with the set. This is actually a bass which is in Oxford, and it's a different maker, I think, but it's also very beautiful. You can go and look at it. I won't play it, it takes too much time. Now, after the Renaissance, of course, recorders fell out a bit and they were reinvented once again in the Baroque. You know what the Baroque was about. Bling, bling and bling. Things got curvier, more beautiful, and the instruments changed, the use of them changed. We didn't want nice low consorts anymore. We wanted crinkly, sparkly, soloistic things. And the bass recorders in the Baroque, they are, once again, like the bass recorders in the Renaissance, they exist, and we have to explain what they were used for. And the two most prolific makers of basses in the Baroque were Bressan and Dennar. We know that because there are 6 surviving Bressan recorders, and there are no less, apparently, according to David Lassotti, 39 surviving Dennar bass recorders. And I find that absolutely astonishing, because if 39 survived, heaven knows how many he actually made. It must have been a big earner for him. And the same with Bressan as well, because 6 of them survived. But they're quite different. And I'm just going to do a little comparison between the two. Now this is a Dennar bass recorder. The originals are all actually quite plain. They're made out of boxwood, which nowadays we think of as exotic. But then it was very plain. They had a brass crook and a single brass key. And you may say, yes, but you seem to have another key here. Well, I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, Dennar basses, they're great. I'll just play that same tune again. I won't actually play something completely different. And even more inappropriate. Now, the thing about Dennar basses is that everyone had the idea that, oh, a Dennar bass is the only bass that plays 2 octaves with Baroque fingering. And it is actually, I'm just messing about with this crook here, it's very odd, isn't it? The Dennar bass, the one I played over in America, does indeed play 2 octaves. It has a very nice high E and an F. Of course, works an awful lot better without the wind cap on, as all these things do. Very nice chromatic scale up there. But actually that's not true, because all the Dennar basses had, like the Renaissance basses, 2 sets of finger holes. Big, middle, small, big, middle, small. And it's very easy to pick up a Dennar bass and think, oh, that's a nice high E and F, which I did. But I think actually that the Dennar basses with that high E and F were just serendipity. The maker just got lucky. Because actually, if you just have the original configuration with the finger hole here, then you have almost no D, except without the alternative fingering, and certainly no C sharp. Now, what were these used for? David Lasocki points out, which I'm sure he does, I'm sure I remember it, that the Dennar basses, the surviving ones, are a very odd collection of pictures. They're not all well, we all know that A415 is a complete waste of time anyway. The pitch varies. And his idea was that they were church pitch pipes, and they were actually used in the choir to train choir people. The choir master would play them the melody on the bass recorder, which saved going and waking up a small boy who was supposed to be blowing up the pump to keep the wind chest inflated so that the choir master could play half a dozen notes on the organ whenever he felt like it. And so I would think, well, maybe the recorders were actually tuned to the church organ in the church that they found themselves in, which is why the pitch varies. And the high E and F was purely serendipitous, and it didn't really need a high C sharp because they were never used. We always expected 2 octaves chromatic, of course. Just to show that the prototype that I made, you can see here the position of the original hole, which I replaced with this key, which came off a shop concert bass. And if you just have this hole, you have absolutely no C sharp and a very weak D. Now, moving to the Bressan, 6 surviving Bressan basses. Here we are, a Bressan bass versus a Dennar bass. And there's a big difference between these two, and the difference is bling. Look at this Bressan bass. It's got a look at that. It's got a strut to hold it up. It's elaborately turned. It's painted black. It's got big ivory bits on it. It's got big solid silver bits. It's sort of, if you're holding one of these, it screams, I've got money. And I can splash it out on this very, very expensive Bressan bass recorder to play in my amateur consort. This doesn't. This is plain brass. This says, I'm as poor as a church mouse, which is probably where they were actually used. So, look at the Bressan bass recorders. Now, it's a funny thing about Bressan because he made some beautiful recordings. He made only 1/4 flute, a good sprinkling of altos. He made some tenors, he made voice flutes, and he made basses. And the interesting thing is that with the 4th flute and the alto, you have a very good 2 octaves Baroque range. But with the voice flutes and the basses, you only have a range of 1 octave and a 1/6. Now, if Bressan could make altos with a range of 2 octaves, why couldn't he make his basses and his voice flutes? And the answer I would say is that he probably could make them with a range of 2 octaves, but he chose not to because the 2 octaves weren't necessary. So, this recorder here, I made these recorders many, many years ago for a very famous Swiss recorder player who ordered them off me. And full of youthful enthusiasm for my product, I packed them in a rucksack and went off to Switzerland and got together with this chap, and we agreed after a couple of hours that they weren't any good at all. So, parting with a handshake and a cup of coffee, I came all the way back to England. And they sat in a corner for a long time till I used one of them on the cover of my book. And then a chap from Sao Paulo said, I really want to buy that. And he happened to be over, and I had to work very hard to persuade them to work, and I got both of them to work, and now actually I rather like them. But I'm just going to play them to you, and you'll see that they don't actually go very high at all. That's as far as it goes. It certainly doesn't have 2 octaves, and you have to use strange fingerings on the side. Now, what were these used for? I would think they were just used for consort instruments. They're certainly not loud enough to be anything else. In fact, what were all these basses used for? Well, once again, referring back to David's book, there are mentions in Lully scores where you have a consort of recorders used in his operas, and they are scored for basses. And perhaps, well, it's a very beautiful thing. You could appear on stage with this, striking a pose. I quite fancy appearing on stage with one of these, striking a pose. In fact, when they didn't work at all, I thought I might sell them as theatrical props. I'm quite glad that I didn't. So, Bressan basses, octave and a sixth, if you're lucky, quite a number of them, probably for rich amateurs. Now, did we ever move on from that in the Baroque? Well, yes, because there is one surviving Baroque bass that does have this middle key, and this is made by Rothenberg. Have to excuse the rubber band, the spring just doesn't work very well. Once again, I made this a long time ago. It's been sitting gathering dust until a couple of hours previously, and it's a very small sound. It hardly works at all down the bottom. But in its original configuration, it plays chromatically up to high F. Very nicely. But of course, by that time, recorders had gone, really, by the time anyone invented this key. So we all know what happened then. The recorder disappeared, but I'm just going to talk about one other thing that I've been making recently. In David's book, there is mention of a Bressan, a long Bressan bass. And also in one of these Lully operas, the recorder parts are scored down to below the range of the F bass. They go down to D and E. So David had the idea that there were great basses in existence in the Baroque, they just hadn't survived. Now, there are rumours. There is a rumour in the recorder homepage, there is a Dennar great bass listed in the recorder database there. I talked to Adrian Brown, he said, never heard of it, no one knows about it, it's a rumour. So perhaps there was a Dennar great bass, perhaps there was a Bressan great bass, the long Bressan great bass mentioned in an auction list in the 18th century. And what would the bass parts in Lully operas have been played on? They couldn't have been played on the Renaissance ones because they were at Renaissance pitch and so they were too high. So occasionally people would say to me, why don't you make a copy of a Baroque great bass? And I had to say, well, there aren't any Baroque great basses. And people would say to me, but what about all the Kungs and Mollenhaus and Merks? And I looked at these things with their forests of keys that Leonardo da Vinci would have been very proud of and thought, I couldn't make one of those, and I'm not even going to try. But then I asked around, and apparently the modern keyed great bass was, I think, an invention, though people might point out if I'm wrong, of von Huene in the 50s, who saw the gap in the market for Baroque great basses. And if people say, oh, I've got a Dennar great bass by Mollenhauer, then it doesn't exist. It's one of the most successful marketing ploys that has been put in the recorder world. And if you look at the modern recorder orchestra with its lines of Kungs and Mollenhaus and Merks at the back making this wonderful deep purring sound, with very happy people who don't even question the fact that their wonderful great basses shouldn't really be there at all. So when people said, will I make a great bass, I thought, okay, well, if I was going to make a great bass, what would Bressan have made? If he was going to make a great bass, what would he have done? And of course, what he would have done was have just taken his bass and made it bigger. So lockdown project number 5 The Dennar bass was lockdown project number 1. Lockdown project number 5 was to make a Bressan great bass. And here it is. Now, I was very pleased with this. It's got 2 widely spaced group of finger holes, which Bressan would have liked. It's got a nice big key. I didn't give it lots of imitation ivory and silver because I didn't know if it was going to work. It stands very high. It's got a strut, just like the Bressan bass, and the foot joint has a big hole at the side for the sound to come out of. And the bore is tapered like the Bressan bass. And I would like to think that it's absolutely fantastic. And you know, it works. So, I'm just going to play the scale on this. Starting in the middle C. Oh, this is also A406 by the way, or 405, because all the Bressan instruments are at that pitch, and I thought I'm not going to pander to this 415 rubbish. It's going to be 405, and it will survive me in a garage sale at 405. Everyone wondering why on earth he made it flat. And going up, some rather odd fingerings, but they do work. And that's normally where you would expect it to stop, but I found there's a couple more fingerings after that. So we go up to B natural, but I can't find a C anywhere. Now I'm hoping to lend these recorders, because I got a consort at A406, I'm going to lend them to a professional quintet for the next few months, and we'll see what they make of them, which is one reason why I have to film it now. So we come to this thing. But I'm now going to move on to the 20th century, because we all know what happened in the 20th century. We got the Kungs, the Mollenhauers, the Merks, Adriana Breukink making things that were far bigger than the Renaissance ones ever were, and the wonderful contemporary instruments. And I haven't got a Mollenhauer, a Merk or a Kung with lots of keys on. I can't afford one, but I do have a Petzold. Now, I bought this, people might have seen this, in a fit of enthusiasm, and also because it was blue. I can't resist anything that's blue. So here it is. I bought it in a fit of enthusiasm and because it was blue. This is, of course, is a great bass in, I'm just going to find something to stand it on. A contra-great bass in F. And it's a fabulous thing. I'm sure that Leonardo da Vinci would have been very proud of it had he made one himself. Now you all know how these things work. And you'll have seen one before. It's a wonderful thing. Now taken over by Joe Kunat, who's making them out of CNC using lots of modern materials. And you can still see great bass in F. great bassinet. They haven't come very far really, have they? If you straighten this out, it'd be about the same size as that. And I'm not going to try and put anything on. I'm just going to stand here with these two and enjoy the picture for a while. Thank you very much for watching. Do come to the London International Festival of Early Music next week. You can see the Bressan bass, or the Bressan Great Bass, and the Bressan bass. And I may never make another one, but like I said, garage sale, 20 years time, keep an eye out. Thank you.